Well, hello, Strange Encounters fans. Tonight, Ben and I are here with you to talk about spirit marriages, a very strange phenomenon indeed. Don't you think so, Ben?
Very strange, and I must admit, I am far from an expert on the topic.
Yes, same here.
But like all things, we're prepared to give it a go and have a chat about anything that's interesting and unusual.
Absolutely, yeah.
And this is certainly one of those sort of topics. But perhaps if you understand some cultures, you can see why it actually happens.
Yeah. And I guess that's the hardest thing that I've found is when I've been looking into it, because it's not common in Western culture, but it's, I've had a real education, I guess, about other cultures and what they do and why they do it, and how it's, in some traditions, it's part of in keeping with becoming something or having a standing or some sort of status or finding a place in community. It's all quite bizarre, I have to say.
Yeah, it seems to be a little bit about lineage as well. So, keeping certain family lineages going, and we can really sort of talk about that. So it does seem to have a very sort of a legal type of a functionality, in cultures. So
well, for those people who don't know what we're talking about spirit marriages or spirit spouse. And a spirit spouse is one of the was where you have someone who marries someone who is dead, a living person who marries someone who's dead. Although in another culture, which we'll cover tonight in this episode, you can have two people who are dead who actually are married by their family. So that's really interesting too. But let's get into it. We're starting off with spirit spouses, or the practice of them, in shamanism, because it's one of the most widespread elements of shamanism. And shamanism is one of the if not the earliest, I guess you could say, form of religion or a spiritual practice, and practiced by Indigenous people, particular people in those cultures, who may have some sort of experience or have some sort of lineage where they learn to be the shamans of their particular tribe, which is similar to a medicine person, or a healer, someone who helps the tribe and with all sorts of decisions that they have to make. But in regard to that, a spirit spouse is a spirit that a shaman can experience as romantic and sexual, or even have a married relationship with them. And in various cultures, gaining a spirit spouse is actually necessary and expected part of initiation into becoming a shaman, which is really interesting. And it's not, you can pick a culture, but there's a tradition in Papua, in the Kaluli, on the northern slope of Mount Bosavi in Papua. The medium or the shaman is always a man who is married in a dream to a woman of the invisible world. And when he has a child by her, he's able to go to sleep, leave his body, and walk about in the Mama world, which is fascinating, isn't it?
Well, it certainly is. And I can't say I know anybody who's experienced that.
I know, but well, actually, some people do have dreams of having relations, with someone in their dreams. I mean, that's not uncommon in Western culture.
Yeah. 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 And I
And
suppose they're talking about incubus and succubus
yep,
type of encounters as well, which is some sort of a being that comes and has interactions with someone along those sort of lines. Yeah.
yeah. It also exists in Islamic cultures, and in those cultures they're called. You know, I mean, we've heard of this in the UFO phenomenon, but they're called jinn. And in some cases, individuals will marry their jinn as well. And jinn are these spirit beings who can attach to an individual, and they may continue to do so down a family line. And they can be positive or they can be negative in a person's life. But some people actually marry them as well. So I'm guessing they just create, they would have to be the benefic type of relationships, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, if you're going to marry one, you'd have to sort of be happy that they were you know, what you were looking for.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Boxes, yeah.
Yeah, and there's one more culture I'll talk about, and maybe after this you'd like to go on with the Chinese tradition.
Yeah.
But in Guatemala, the Kichi in Momostenango, in diviners who are recruited in a classical shamanic fashion, including divine election through dreams. And their initiation involves a marriage to a spirit spouse. So that's fascinating too. And also, it comes up in Haitian voodoo as well, where they participate in wedding ceremonies between voodoo divinities and their devotees. It's also believed that there's sexuality between the conjugal pair by way of dreams. Fascinating.
I really sort of like, you know, I can understand a ceremony or, you know, some type of an initiation or, obviously joining a marriage. I can understand that. But how do you move forward from that point on a day-to-day basis? It must be sort of like you must have some sort of effigy or, you know, something that's you know, provides connection to it, or you have to work fairly hard on a visual level, perhaps, to sort of to bring this into some sort of to give it like I think I come at from the point of view that when you talk about marriage and union, it's probably through very Western eyes that I sort of think about those concepts. And when you're not coming from that background, it is sort of hard to put yourself forward into it to see how that works on a day-to-day basis. I mean, it might be very peaceful. You might get on very well.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking while you're talking, there's the Day of the Dead celebrations in Mexico, where they have the dead bodies of family members, you know, sitting around. You know, it's basically, and they include them in their celebrations. So, I mean,
which is a wonderful thing. I really think that's a great thing. You know, like I do. I think that shows a great connection to ancestry, and you know, whereas in Western society, death is always treated in, you know, it's always sort of, we treat it we're very distanced from death, I think, in our society, and we don't sort of have that type of you know, sort of sit with the corpse for a week sort of thing, you know. I think
there's the tradition of the wakes.
Yeah, that's right. And that's kind of, once you've gone through the morning, you go to celebration. With a spirit marriage, you would think that the party doesn't stop, really. Like, you know, you've got this connection that's going to go on through this lifetime and maybe the next lifetime, if successive lifetimes.
Yes,
if that's how it indeed operates.
Yeah. So why don't you kick us off about the Chinese tradition of wedding the dead?
I will, and because that was the one that I read first and sort of studied first, and I kind of feel like I'm know a little bit about it now, as opposed to knowing nothing about it.
Yeah.
So so very wonderful and complex culture, the Chinese culture. It's been around a very long time. Obviously, you know, it's over 5,000 years old, and when I was sort of reading, having a bit of a look through, okay, what is this thing to have a spirit marriage? You know, which was a whole concept that I sort of struggled with. in traditional Chinese culture, it is shameful to be the parent of an unwed daughter, and unmarried girls are often shunned from society. And so for men, ghost marriages were often performed for the sake of progeny. In addition, a ghost marriage for men let the family's lineage carry on. And the spouse of a deceased male could adopt the child who would carry on the lineage of the man's family. And other reasons for performing ghost marriages within the Chinese culture for deceased males are dreams and seances from the spirits of the males who want to be married. And Chinese tradition also says that the younger brothers do not marry before their older brothers. So sometimes a Chinese ghost marriage will be performed to stay in line with that tradition. So if you're a younger brother, you can't get married before your older brother. That's seen as out of order for reasons. So therefore, if the oldest brother happens to die or pass away, that's kind of creates a blockage for the younger ones who are still alive. So you sort of have to have this ceremony to complete that for him.
So to marry off the dead brother.
Yeah, you have to marry off the dead brother in order for the other ones to do that. And you're also solving the other problem when you've got a girl who can't marry for some reason or whatever, on the shelf. You can sort of take care of that as well and say, well, we've ticked that box too. So even though we don't have an actual live living husband, we've got him married to someone else over here. And sometimes the family of a deceased person will use a priest as a matchmaker in Chinese culture. So other times they'll leave out a red envelope with gifts and believe that the deceased person's spouse will reveal himself. Another interesting tradition. And sometimes when a woman's fiance died, in order for her to participate in the ghost marriage, she would have to participate in the man's funeral service, which included uncomfortable mourning standards, taking a vow of celibacy and to take up residence with the man's family. And conversely, there's no requirements for a man doing this, but that has not been recorded. So a woman can be basically, I don't know if indentured's the right word, but she can sort of be absorbed into the other man's family, but has to be, become nun-like and remain, true and celibate to the spirit husband. So
that's bizarre, isn't it?
It's got to present its challenges, doesn't it? I mean, it's got to present its challenges. I see how that. I've got my head sort of a bit of. I can understand why and how they have a purpose for this. And I said up until just recently, till you suggested that we discussed this, I just had no concept that this was even a thing. So, although I had heard of, you do hear about odd people, marrying Jim Morrison or something, or Elvis Presley, like you do hear about these sort of things, bizarrely.
Yes.
These are, but and I'm certainly not making light of these traditions or anything like that in cultures who've been around and functioned for a lot longer than I've ever been in existence for. So, I respect the culture. But I find it interesting to analyze why they have these sort of practices. And I'm not saying that it's not a good practice or that they shouldn't do it, or that, although it's actually frowned upon now. And so I'll talk a little bit about the performance of a Chinese ghost marriage. And so these ghost marriages were similar to both a wedding and a funeral. The families of the participants will exchange gifts of various sizes, which can include cakes, dresses, and money. And to represent the deceased person, little effigies made of bamboo will be used, not can be used, will be used. And these are clothed in what people would wear to weddings and are usually burnt after the ceremony. And most of the rites of the marriage are actually performed in the same way that regular Chinese marriages are usually performed. So you've got a little effigy and you can hold your ceremony, and then you can do it all, and then job's right. So it's interesting. It is interesting. And there was a byproduct of this was that there was a theft of female corpses.
Yeah.
So the practice leads to reported cases of female corpses being stolen And in 2017 to 2019, there was a black market of female corpses across several provinces, Shandong, Shaanxi, and Shaanxi. And a female's body could be sold in the range of several $100,000, but not dollars or local currency. And even corpses of married elderly women had become targets for such illegal trade. So, and some of the graveyards, they started putting up CCTV and concrete coffins to sort of help to prevent this from occurring. So
that's amazing.
But there seems to be a whole lot of sort of rules and you know, can and can't do's around it as well. So, you know, the whole, how you go about approaching the whole thing.
Yeah.
You know, I can really relate to it from the point of view of, like, if you've got someone who's died and you know, and you've got to keep this lineage thing going. Like, I fully understand how thousands of years ago that was probably seen as a necessary thing in a cultural context. But in modern China, it's now not actually allowable, but it still is practiced in certain northern areas.
It's bizarre. I mean, to us in the Western world, it's quite bizarre. And actually, and even in China, because as you say, this is some rural areas where it's still practiced, even though it's not supposed to be. So it sounds like it's a very, very old tradition entrenched in the culture.
Yes. Yeah, this is not something that they just started 100 years ago. Like, it's been going on for a very, very long time. You know, and so the other thing you could talk about it too was that at the start I sort of said that, you know, as far as the living go, and unmarried daughters is a bit of an issue. So not only did the Chinese customs concerning death greatly burden the family, but an unmarried daughter became a source of embarrassment and concern. So they said that traditionally girls who did not marry in China were regarded as a threat to the entire family for undisclosed reasons, and were not allowed to continue living at home. So, and even in contemporary Hong Kong, it's believed that unmarried women are assumed to have psychological problems. So, and they said that it's sort of that the spirit weddings were for girls who choose to remain unmarried. It was kind of a way of remaining unmarried, like they want to be single, but if they have a spirit marriage, then you can be married and make everybody happy, but you can still maintain your single life because you are, you know, you're already spoken for. So I suppose it has a two-way street if that's your situation.
Yeah. Interesting. I dug up a story actually about this involving an ABC journalist from one of the provinces in China who had first-hand experience with this sort of arrangement, because he had a friend who died of leukemia, and after his death, his mother found him a bride named Li Ying. Very difficult to pronounce. Sorry, anyone who's got a Chinese background if I'm not pronouncing this properly. But anyway, Li came from the same village, which was hours away, and she was hours away of dying of kidney failure. Sorry, wrong person. What am I saying? The friend of the journalist, he was hours away of dying of kidney failure. Anyway, the bride passed away shortly after the ceremony as well, and the two families hugged and wept in the funeral, and they were grieving but celebrating at the same time. But anyway, the day after, this funeral turned wedding was held, and the couple, who both passed away at a young age, had never met each other while alive, but they were buried together at Lee's family grave. So it's incredibly significant, these things, for the families involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was sort of like, I thought, okay, well, this is kind of like, you know, I was sort of trying to establish if there's a paranormal aspect to this type of cultural practice. And it says that ghost marriages are often set up by request of the spirit of the deceased, who, upon finding itself without a spouse in the other world, causes misfortune for its natal family, or its family. And the family of its betrothed or for the family of the deceased married sisters. And this takes the form of sickness by one or many more family members. When the sickness is not cured by ordinary means, the family turns to divination and learns of the plight of the ghost through a seance. And more benignly, a spirit may appear to a family member in a dream and request a spouse. And there's a story of a 14-year-old Cantonese boy who died, and a month later he appeared to his mother in a dream, saying that he wished to marry a girl who had recently died in Ipoh, Perak, and the son did not reveal her name, and his mother used a Cantonese spirit medium, and through her, the boy gave the name of the girl, together with her place of birth and age, and details of her horoscope, which was subsequently found to be compatible with his. So I sort of thought, so there is potentially a connection from the other side coming in to talk to family about a need, which I thought was important because, this is a paranormal show, that there can be connection from the spirit world back to here as much as it goes the other way.
Yeah. And I think that the practice of ghost marriages seems to be about fear of ghosts and superstition, because the families of the deceased are extremely scared of being haunted by the deceased family members. And they don't want the ghost to come back to the living world and bring disasters and deaths.
Bad luck and things like that.
Yeah. So it's as much about that too. So they're trying to appease the dead to make sure they've got everything they need and everything they want. Actually, it's a little bit like, if you think about it, it's a little bit like Egyptian burials of their pharaohs and people up in the, maybe the high priestesses, priests and priestesses, I'm not really sure, but
well, they'd send them off with their favourite cow and their best easy shoes and a few slaves as well. So you've got to be comfortable in the next world.
So it signifies a very strong belief in an afterlife, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah, and a interrelation between the two.
Yes,
and perhaps in other cultures beyond Western culture, it's a much closer. There's less distance between it. Whereas in sort of Western Christianity sort of world, there's earth and there's heaven, and they're two distinct places that you can sort of only really be in one and perhaps not communicate with the other, or maybe not, depending on your thoughts there. But in these cultures, it seems to be more like this, that there is an overlap and an interplay between the living and the dead, a la Egypt and these China and things like that. So,
yeah. And before you mentioned incubus and succubi too. And for anyone who doesn't know, an incubus is a demon in male form who, according to mythological and legendary traditions, lies upon sleeping women in order to engage in sexual activity with them. Its female counterparts are succubus, and there are tales of incubi and succubi. They've been told for many centuries in traditional societies. And some of those traditions hold that repeated sexual activity with an incubus or succubus may result in the deterioration of health, an impaired mental state, or even death, which is interesting.
How do you establish a relationship with an incubus or a succubus? And do you do that, or is it just thrust upon you? And you don't have any say in any of that. You're just purely a victim.
Yes.
Rather than a relationship.
Yes, I think that. I think exactly that you don't get a say in that.
So like an energy eating type of energy sucking type of a creature, that's just destroying your life force.
Yeah, and
feeding off you.
Yeah, and engaging in this sexual activity. And I just wanted to sort of dig a bit deeper into that because, with both of us having the UFO background, I know from my experience that I've received some reports of people who say that who've been involved with alien abduction experiences, for example, where they're taken away against their will by these grey aliens, and they've been forced to have sex on these on spaceships, basically, with some of those beings, which symbolically is a very shamanic experience. And I don't know if you remember, Ben, but there was a research, you might remember Simon from Perth, he passed away some years ago, but he had done Simon Harvey Wilson, he had done a thesis on the comparisons between alien abduction experiences and shamanic initiation experiences, and found that there was a definite parallel between the two types of experiences, which actually goes back to how we opened this with, spirit spouses being one of the most widespread elements of shamanism. So I do wonder about whether there could be some sort of connection there, because not everyone had those experiences with in their physical form.
No.
They had them in altered states of consciousness.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? You can sort of say that, these could be forces that have been around for a long time, and the form of it is shifting at the same time as well. So, we see little grey beings now, and in the past we saw devils and things like that. So, is it the same phenomenon that's been with us all along, and it's just changes how it appears in different things, or are they separate and distinct things altogether? But there's still crossover themes.
Well, I think in some cases, it's not actually what it appears to be. Say, for example, with alien abduction experiences and people being taken on board to partake in some sexual activity. And it doesn't actually get spoken about very much in UFO research, hardly at all, because although it was in the 90s when alien abduction experiences were prevalent, but I was hearing cases, but even then it was a bit of a taboo subject, because speaking about sexuality at any time is difficult, let alone under those sort of circumstances.
Yes, I think we spoke about this another time about, what's capable of being discussed at the time.
Yes.
Of an event occurring, like some things can be discussed, and then you've got all these taboo areas that everyone gets uncomfortable about.
Absolutely.
Doesn't want to sort of, always reluctant to look at, and you take the brave souls who do actually, take those leaps sometimes, and then sometimes they're criticized for that. You can't look at that, or that's sort of, but I think to really understand and nut out all of these things, you sort of have to take a good look at everything from a
absolutely, yeah,
level-headed perspective, I suppose.
I think so. And I mean, you don't have to go to Indigenous cultures either to look at these types of things, because there's evidence of spirit spouses, I guess you'd say, through dreams about Christ by nuns who are considered to be brides of Christ.
Yeah.
So, I think that's very interesting too. I mean, they wear a wedding ring, to some of the denominations, to be married to Christ, a non-physical being. So, it doesn't have to be Indigenous or woo-woo. It can be quite traditional too.
You're right. You're dead right. I mean, you look across Christian culture, and nuns are very much that thing. They are married to Jesus Christ, and that's how they all, they all wear rings and stuff like that. And you go, you're coming at this now, 20 minutes after we've started this conversation, I can see that it's not that far removed from as far removed as when we first started the conversations I thought this actually was. It's still there. So how does a nun have a relationship with Jesus Christ in terms of, as a sustainable thing? It's obviously in their belief structure. It's a real thing for them. And I suppose each person's probably slightly different in how that sort of, how you keep that sort of alive for yourself.
And I think the other question that begs from that conversation is, well, who was Jesus anyway? Because supposedly he was a product of a human woman and a non-human being called Yahweh. So I mean, who, was he an alien hybrid or something like this? And that's not to be disrespectful to any Christian watching this, although I'm sure there are none. So I'm not too worried about offending anyone.
No.
No.
That's what we do on the, not offend people on the show, but we ask questions and we look at these things, because you have to be able to look at these things. You've got to be able to say that, how does all this relate?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
How does this all come together?
And I've been aware of this case, of a close encounter case, for many years now. And it's a strange story of David Huggins, who probably by now is about 78, a 78-year-old man, who claimed to have had a lifetime of encounters with otherworldly beings, aliens, including an interspecies romance with an extraterrestrial woman with whom he lost his virginity at age 17. Yeah, now, right. How does one, I didn't go down too well with his wife.
No, right? Not.
And he's having this otherworldly, and I really mean otherworldly, relationship, lifelong relationship with this being. Now, whether that being was actually an extraterrestrial, or whether that being was a jinn, but it certainly became a spirit spouse. Put it that way.
Yes, becoming a spirit spouse. It's all very unusual, and you can sort of understand, it's kind of hard to be jealous of a ghost, isn't it?
Well,
or is it emotional connection that's the problem? If someone is emotionally connected to something, whether it's a puppy or a spirit, then that sometimes can cause issues. But it's not like a direct live competitor, is it?
Well, it depends, because they can possess and manifest in the body. Or spirit of a living person, not be visible to ordinary people. So, I don't know the whole story of David Huggins. I've looked at the documentary, and you've actually got to pay to hire it, so I'm not going to do that. But you can go to YouTube and watch the the trailer for it. It looks quite interesting. He's an artist as well, so we've been painting images of his experiences all this time, which is really interesting. But the other question that came up for me was, how do you divorce a spirit spouse?
And for what reason?
Well, because, you may not want to be with them after a while. And I was reading that it can be very difficult to divorce and overcome them.
Well, that's, especially if they asked for you. In the dream of a relative, and they said, you've got to find me someone, and and then it's sort of like, well, it's not working out.
See you later.
Nice to know you.
And are there possessions to split? I don't know.
Are there possessions? To split. Yeah, exactly. Maybe it's just a possession to split.
Yeah, exactly. The possession needs to be split.
Well, very interesting question. I suppose I have not exposed to enough examples of that to sort of say that, yes, in China there's an example of such and such no longer being with someone, and I don't know. I don't even know if there is an out for you once you're committed on that path, other than the fact that you might just be able to put it aside, unless there's some type of physical manifestation coming back the other way, things are traveling around the room or whatever, say, well, hang on, this is still an eye, we're still an item. Very interesting problem to have.
It would be. And I can imagine, if the spirit wants to separate itself from you, it may do that by turning nasty. So there's another situation to have to contend with. I
just wanted to sort of quickly touch on the French experience, because we've sort of talked about non-Western cultures, and the French culture has its own particular things that are very much relevant to its culture. And France says that France is a rare country in which it's explicitly legal for a living person to marry a dead one. And Article 171 of the French Civil Code, the laws by which the country is actually governed, states that the President of the Republic may, for grave reasons, authorise the celebration of a marriage where one of the future spouses is dead. And naturally, there are caveats on that, and the living person must prove that the couple intended to marry and has to obtain permission to wed from the deceased's family, which is perhaps quite crucial. And if the president chooses to grant the wedding request, the marriage becomes retrospective from the day before the deceased person's death. And the living spouse does not receive the right to interstate succession. That is, they do not acquire the dead person's assets or property. But if a woman is pregnant at the time of her partner's death, the child, when born, is considered to be an heir of the deceased, which I would have thought that would have been, perhaps natural enough.
Mm.
And though the civil codes of France were introduced during Napoleon's reign, the article enabling post-mortem matrimony is a relatively recent addition. And the story behind the addition begins with a disaster. And on December 2nd, 1959, the Malpasset Dam, just north of the French Riviera, collapsed, unleashing a furious wall of water that killed 423 people. And when then President Charles de Gaulle visited the devastated site, a bereaved woman, Irene Jodard, pleaded to be allowed to marry her dead fiancé. And on the 31st of December, French Parliament passed the law permitting posthumous marriages. So that's a fairly recent example of it being,
When was that?
1959.
Oh, okay.
I'd consider that recent times. Relatively recent times.
Yeah.
So not yesterday, but
very interesting.
And you've got to sort of prove all these things, and I suppose for your own reasons you can, and that obviously their family have got to say, yeah, that's fine.
Actually, I was just wondering, when nuns leave their group, do they have to go through some sort of divorce ceremony?
Well, you would think that would be the case.
Although Catholics don't, I think do they still not believe in divorce? I don't know. I'm not up with religions these days.
Well, it's a little. I think the answer is a yes to the question, but it's obviously a lot simpler now, because back in the day, my grandparents who were Catholics got divorced. They had to get their marriage annulled in the eyes of the church.
Right.
That was back in the 70s. So when that happened, so you had to get the church to agree to annul the marriage in the eyes of God, and then after that, it was all good to go. As far as, but imagine if you leave the nuns, as in like you are a nun and you become an ex-nun, as in like, I don't want to do this anymore. Then maybe you sort of have to say, well, Jesus, that this is it. I'm moving on. In some way, maybe that's even a personal thing as much as anything. Like, to get to that point where you're no longer a nun. But if you see it for the course and you stay right through until you're 95 and then you die, then you obviously go and be with him forever in the afterlife as a committed spiritual marriage.
Right.
But after you've left, if you're leaving, then I reckon there'd have to be some sort of a process of stepping out of it. But I'm not an expert.
Yeah, me either. It's all very strange. But I did find a website that was saying that some signs of the presence of a spirit husband or spirit wife in a person's life are when you have a constant dream of a man or a wife or a beast, in brackets, coming to have sex with you. That's a very strange thing, but
must happen.
It must happen for it to be listed. Yeah.
It must have been reported as an experience or a phenomenon or something like that some people have.
Yes, yeah. And I can imagine that would come up quite a bit in shamanic practices too. If you have wed a spirit spouse, then that would probably happen in your life. Then if you wanted to separate, I don't even know if that can actually happen in shamanic practices. I imagine it could, because you can undo all sorts of things in shamanic practices. They have entity extractions and all those types of things. So I'm sure they get around it one way or another. So yeah, they must go through some sort of ritual or ceremony to no longer involve themselves in that relationship.
What would be the reasons for doing it though? Like
what to have the spirit marriage?
No, to step out of it. What reasons do you think would be there to say, I don't want to be in this anymore?
I think that it would be because the spirit itself had become unreasonable, making unreasonable demands to the point where it goes against whatever social group that you're in, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. They're sort of indicating, some sort of mischief behaviour or something.
Yes, I think so.
It's causing disturbances in your life.
Yes, yeah, I think so. And probably for a shaman, interfering in their healing work and, yeah, like you say, causing mischief in the life, not only the lives of the shaman, but the lives of the people in the tribe. And maybe even causing them to have nightmares and bad, lots of bad dreams and strange things happening and, hexing people and all sorts of things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting that a lot of these things are still, still relevant today. And I was surprised that the French one was so recent in time that they've made that a possibility. So it's very, very interesting stuff.
Yeah. And on a Christian website, it was saying, how do you divorce and overcome the spirit spouse? Is to give your life to Christ, repent your known sins, confess your sins as much as you can remember, all those sorts of things. Yeah. Break any negative covenants that you may have knowingly or unknowingly made, or any covenants with them, because people can get involved with, for example, what am I thinking of? Perhaps, what am I thinking of, Ben, with the boards, the Ouija boards?
Oh, Ouija boards, yeah.
And in some situations, it may open people up to those entities entering their life or deciding that they want to stay with that person,
But via that mechanism, like that can happen anyway, can't it? Like, that doesn't require a ceremony.
No, it doesn't.
To connect you. If you go playing with things like if you're playing with fire, then that can attach itself and potentially be hard to get rid of, even if you shift houses. So interesting.
It may be that the entity decides it wants to wed you.
Yes,
and wed itself to your energy.
Oh, that's an interesting thought, isn't it? I mean, this is someone saying, "I'll have you."
Yes.
And, for whatever reason it is, I've decided that you're the one, and that's it. And there's nothing you can say or do about it. Yeah. That's the way it's going to be for as long as I determine that's the situation that I want to be in. But you've got to think that needs and wants and things like that in the spirit world versus the physical world. I mean, how similar are they?
I don't know.
How similar can they be?
It's fascinating, isn't it? The whole thing.
Presumably in the spirit world, you don't have a body.
Yeah.
So therefore, you perhaps you still have some sort of emotional record or something like that, maybe, potentially. Whereas in the physical world, you're hungry, tired, all that sort of stuff, and you've got to deal with all that. So yeah, how do you have this coming together of really two different, say the dense underworld of us here, and then up on upper echelons where it's different. It's still sort of, how does it come together? Like, it must be something, get something out of it.
Yeah, I'm also thinking too, you're prompting me that perhaps there's an overlap between spirit marriages and possession. That's a possibility too.
Wow, people like to possess people in this world. So you're my possession, and if I can't have you, no one else will, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So, that could very much be the case.
Yeah.
And there's, like, I haven't done a whole lot of ghost research this week, but I'm sure that if I went looking, it wouldn't take too much to find examples of ghosts coming back and being around. Actually, you do hear it. I've had people tell me.
Yeah.
An old lady I used to work with, she was married for years. Her husband died, and and she said he was still hanging around the house after he had passed, and it, you know, in sort of tangible ways that she could sort of know that he was actually still there in some capacity. So yeah, they definitely can come back.
Well, there has been some research done on partners, husbands, wives who died, and they will, you know, they've been seen for some years, in some cases, been seen for some years after they've passed away. So they can still rattle around the house, you know. And you know, that it's said that when someone dies, you know, you wish them well, and release them as well as you can, so that you don't hold their spirit to this earthly plane, which is not easy for a lot of people. But perhaps, you know, as we've discussed on various episodes before, that the deceased doesn't want to leave the earthly plane and wants to hang around the spouse, you know, and stay connected, and be watching over who he or she is picking as their next partner, and all those types of things, you know.
Yeah, meddling. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, getting in there to meddle, you know. And I just think of the movie Ghost, like, you know, that's a good example of it.
Yes, meddling in the world of the living.
Meddling in the world of the living and dabbling in the world of the dead. So, you know, it's, you know, the other two places should remain distinct from each other, but they do apparently appear to overlap on many different ways. And then I suppose if you look at you know, like you know, tragic death around love, and, you know, like the classic stuff from all the novels and all that sort of stuff, that, you know, Shakespearean sort of things, and people, you know, there's, if it's about feeling and connection, and that's what ties between the two worlds. You know, I will love you forever, that sort of stuff. You know, it can possibly continue on, but obviously it can be done for, you know, more practical family reasons. And, you know, we've got to get a deceased brother married, and, you know, and we don't want this daughter who doesn't look like she's going to find a partner to be left on the shelf either. So I can understand all those cultural reasons. It is a fascinating area.
Yeah, it is.
You know. And there's some examples from the United States as well.
Do you have any?
Yeah, it's called, what's it called? Let me try to read a word. It's called necrogamy. Is generally necrogamy, necrogamy. Necrogamy is generally illegal in the United States. So, yeah, but there has been at least one wedding-themed funeral. In 1987, a Venezuelan man died in Florida. The next week, his alleged fiancée told the probate court that she was his wife and claimed the right to administer his estate, and that she was entitled to the amount of the estate normally given to a spouse, rather than the entire estate going to his children. And 2 weeks after the man's death, a Florida court ordered that the alleged marriage be legally recognised. However, this order was reversed the next year after an appeal by the man's children. So they're obviously haggling over the dollars. And in 2006, Nicole Pauletre, fiance of a police shooting victim, Sean Bell, tried to posthumously marry him. However, this was not possible because a marriage license had not been signed. And she nevertheless took Bell's last name to honour his memory. So, I mean, that's sort of showing, you know, people attempting to still connect after, you know, death. And maybe that second example is a better example of it. You know, it's a bit rich to say, oh, you know, I want to get on this, you know, I want to marry him after he died because I want to get more money out of him. You know?
Yeah.
But many motivations, I suppose.
Yeah. Oh, it's just a fascinating topic, which I'd love to dig into more deeply on another occasion.
It'd be good to sort of find, you know, perhaps more examples actually of it.
Yeah.
You know, like the theory of it and why they do it, you know, I understand, but perhaps some living examples of how it works on the ground, and situations where people have said, well, no, I'm calling it quits, or this is getting more intense, or, you know, sort of, and the whole thing is, you've got cultural and then you've got belief. So if you've got an ancient culture that says this is how we do things to keep families together and to sort of, this is how it's done, there's that aspect of it. And then there's got to be a certain belief aspect of it as well, where there is some actual belief that this is a real thing. I do have a partner who is in the other world, or you marry them that way. And that's different to someone whose partner's died.
Yes.
Because you can have a partner who's died and still feel very, very connected to them for many, many years afterwards, and and pining and missing them and all that sort of stuff. That's a different situation again.
Yes.
And that's kind of real too, because you can feel like that's in the next world and I'm going to go join them. And I can understand that. But when you just say, like, if you hadn't met them, for example, brother Hugh died and now we've got to get a wife for him, and she didn't know, or she might have known him or not known him, but that's to get that connection happening. So
yes, yeah. Wow, fascinating. But I still think we've covered a lot there in this episode. I mean,
we have, yeah. We've covered a lot with not very much. So, it's it raises more questions all the time. So
it does, yeah.
Once you sort of focus on it and you sort of go, well, this is something that actually happens. Yes, it does. And there's various ways that it happens. Yes, it does. There's questions that arise out of that maybe our listeners and viewers might go away and think about it as well. Like, I don't know of any Australian examples where this has happened in Australia. I'm not saying that it has or that it hasn't, but
you're not aware of any published examples.
No,
I'm sure it happens because there are a lot of people who have these dreams.
Absolutely, exactly. It's like all these things. What's not reported?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
more non-reported than there is reported. Yeah,
and anything to do with sexuality and in dreams, particularly, I think is just something that people don't talk about.
No, and they say it was just a dream.
It's a big taboo. Yeah,
it's a big taboo, and you've got to have a really open-minded, trusting person to listen to that, don't you? Like, you just don't come out and tell your dad, do you? Like, it's you've got to have someone that you can go, look, this is what happened, or a group of people who maybe that's where groups are good, because you can share like experiences. But I've never heard of a group that's on that basis.
Yes, definitely more to dig into there for us in another episode, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think we'll come back to spirit marriages episode 2.
Yes. Well, thanks, Ben. That's been really interesting. And viewers, if you enjoyed this episode, please click like and also subscribe if you feel the urge to maintain notifications about when we upload our shows, our episodes.
Be sure to check out the previous episodes if you haven't had the opportunity to watch some of our previous ones. We've had some real good ones out there.
Yeah, please do.
Get on there and check them out as well.
Yeah. So until next time, Ben, thank you very much.
Thanks, Sheryl. Yes, and I'll think about it now for the next few days. And
all right. We'll catch you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.